Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is an exciting one because I'm going to be doing my finale for my 2023 Pan That palette. Those of you who followed along last year know that I was working on my Morphe and Jaclyn Hill Volume 1 palette with a very specific approach to Pan That palette. It was more of a usage style. So I wanted to use every shade in the palette 10 times over the course of the year, and I am here to share with you my final numbers for the project and close out my 2023 Pan That palette. Happy New Year, by the way. I think the last video you saw from me was pre-filmed in December, so I haven't actually sat down in front of the camera yet this year, so wishing you all a very happy new year. I hope you are all well and looking forward to the year ahead. I will go ahead and tell you that I unfortunately did not meet my 10 use on every shade goal in 2023, but I feel very proud of the progress that I was able to make anyway. If you want to see some amazing Pan That palette progress on this palette, I just recently discovered a YouTube channel and Instagram account that I will link for you in the description box. Many of you probably already follow her, but her name is Monica Adrianna. And she did an amazing job on her Pan That palette with this palette from last year, and I am so sad that I just now discovered her because I could have been following along the whole year. But yes, she is a much more efficient panner than I am. I already kind of knew that going in with this palette, which is why my goal was not to hit pan in every shade, but just to use every shade 10 times. And there were quite a few shades that I was able to meet that goal or exceed that goal. And I did end up hitting pan on a few shades as well. So I am gonna go through and share with you my progress on each shade. Like I said, I am very proud of the progress that I made on this palette, even though I didn't quite reach the goal that I set for myself. If you've seen my palette collection video, which I'll also have linked in the description box, you know I have an enormous collection of eyeshadow palettes, and it's very important to me to rotate through them all. So in part, I think that's the reason why I didn't quite meet my goals on this palette. I did inherit a big stack of amazing palettes from one of my friends at the end of last year. To find out more about that, go and watch that palette collection video. But yeah, my palette collection grew, and I was just excited to use all the palettes that I had. And then, as those of you who have been around know, I had a bit of a difficult year last year in my personal life. 2023 was a year of highs and lows. There were a couple of really bright shining highs, and there were a lot of really low lows. So all of that to say, I'm not beating myself up for not meeting my goals. As you'll see, the shades that I didn't hit my goal on are the shades that I kind of already knew I was gonna have trouble with. Anyone remember this corner of doom? But let's just go through all of the shades and I will let you know how many times I was able to use them last year. In total, I used this palette over 300 times. The shade in light right here, I used 23 times. Thought I was gonna get pan on this one because I got pan on the one next to it, but this one I guess was just a little bit more tightly packed than its neighbor, which is Beam, which I used 21 times, and I did hit pan on the 21st use. The shade Silk Cream I used 16 times. The shade MFEO I used 13 times. The shade Faint I used 32 times. I was determined to hit pan on this one as well, and I did hit pan on the 32nd use. The shade Sissy I only used 10 times, so I did hit my goal, but I did not exceed it. And the shade Little Lady I used 12 times. So 2 pans on the top row. I'm not mad about that, especially because my goal wasn't even to hit pan, so those were just sort of bonuses that I felt like I wanted to challenge myself with, and I'm excited that I was able to get a couple of pans in that top row. I used every shade on the second row 10 times, so I met my goal on all of them, with the exception of the shade Pooter, which I actually used 12 times, so I exceeded my goal on this shade. So I met my goal on all of these, but no pans on this row. I thought I was getting really close to hitting pan on the shade Queen. You can kind of see a dip there, but no pan yet, so maybe one to come back to in the future. On the third row though, I did hit a pan in the shade Obsessed. I used it 21 times and I hit pan on the 21st use. Really grew to love and adore this shade as an all over the lid shade over the course of my using this palette last year. And as you'll notice, the shimmers in this palette are the only ones that have pans. The mattes in this palette are so tightly and densely packed. The shimmers are too, but they're definitely a little bit easier to hit pan on than the mattes. The rest of the shades on this row I did use 10 times and hit my goal, with the exception of Cran Apple, which I only used 5 times. I think Cran Apple is a beautiful shade, but there were just only so many days I felt like I could get away with a red shimmer on the eye. And a lot of the other shades that I was working on, like Hillster and Firework and even SBN to some extent, were already kind of in that rusty family. So I feel like Cran Apple, being the brightest of the red shimmers in this palette, it just wasn't in the cards for me to use this one the 10 times, but that's okay. Royalty was another one that was a little tough for me. That's this purple one here. I ended up only using this one 6 times, and that even was a push. I have nothing against a purple, but this particular purple is a shimmer, and I just found it a little bit difficult to use and to get myself to use it when dipping into this palette. I have other purple shades in my collection that I just love, and I find if I'm doing a purple look, typically I want a purple matte in there and like a lighter purple shimmer as well. So this one was just a little bit more difficult for me to use and gravitate to naturally. The same goes for Twerk, which I unfortunately only used 2 times. This is a really pretty color. I like the color, but in terms of like a shade for the eyes, I just found it was difficult to build into looks. And also the formulas of these were just a little bit more difficult to work with because they are those darker shimmer shades. Hustle, on the other hand, I used 16 times. And I hit pan on the 15th use, and then I think I used it 1 additional time to expand the pan so it would be easier for you all to see it. This is another one that I ended up really falling in love with all over the lid last year as like almost a cool toned-ish taupey shimmer. This is pretty much the most cool tone neutral in this palette, and I ended up really loving it for everyday looks. Meeks, I only used 8 times, so close. 24/7, I only used 9 times. I should have probably just used this one today and cheated, but I didn't want to do that, so didn't quite meet my goal on that one. And then I used Chip and Mocha 10 times each, so I did hit my goal on those. Pool Party and Jada, I used both of those shades 9 times. Again, I probably should have just cheated to bump up to the 10. But to be honest, I got a little bit tired at the end there of trying to force myself to use these kinds of shades. So I didn't force it. Diva, I used 6 times. And then I was able to hit or exceed my 10 use goal on the rest of the shades in the palette. Enchanted, I used 10 times. Central Park and Soda Pop, I used 12 times. And Abyss, I used 10 times. So definitely a few there that were close but didn't quite hit, and then a couple like the shade Twerk that it was just kind of me giving up and not really wanting to force myself to use shades that I didn't feel like using. But overall, as I said, I'm happy with my progress. I'm really proud of myself for going into 2023 with such a large palette for Pan That Palette, but being such a large palette, though it did give me a lot of variety, it was also just a really big challenge. So those are my numbers for my Pan That Palette for 2023. Thank you to everyone who followed along with that project last year if you did. I'm sure I will be coming back to this palette in the future. I've got a couple of shimmers that I can see myself working on to hit pan, and a lot of these neutral mattes are just sort of staple shades. I've got a couple of shades I can even use for my brows in this palette. So this one isn't going anywhere. It's going to remain in my collection, but I am excited to take a little bit of a break from this palette for a while and return to it again with fresh eyes in the future. So now let's talk about my Pan That Palette plans for 2024. Every year I say I'm not going to do a Pan That Palette, and every year I end up doing a Pan That Palette. I guess I'm just a glutton for punishment. I really don't know. Today is January 7th as I'm filming this video, and 3 days ago I was convinced that I would not be doing a Pan That Palette project in 2024. Today, I was just thinking about it, and I was just thinking, you know, it's kind of nice to have a go-to palette that you can just sort of keep out on your vanity and use throughout the year without having to think about it, especially for like day-to-day looks, getting ready really quickly, doing makeup for my everyday life, not necessarily to film in. Like, there is something really nice and almost comforting about having that palette that you just come back to, and I might as well track it, right? I might as well share my progress if I'm gonna have that palette out and be using it anyway, right? So for 2024, I'm going to be doing a Pan That Palette again. Even though I said I wasn't, this year I get to blame Jessica Lee because I watched her intro video for her Better Together and fun-sized palettes that she's going to be working on through the Fantastic Ladies collab this year. It was her video that I watched and I thought, I actually have perfect palettes to go with both of those themes, and they happen to be the oldest palettes in my collection. So I am going to be taking part in my very first ever Fantastic Ladies collab for my Pan That Palette project in 2024. It's technically a Pan Those Palettes project because I'm going to be working on a fun-sized palette and a Better Together palette. I am not technically part of the Fantastic Ladies Facebook group just because I don't really use Facebook, but for those of you who are interested, I'll have that information in the description box below. I watch a lot of the creators who are involved in the Fantastic Ladies group, including Jessica Lee, who I just mentioned, and I just decided, even though I'm not part of the Facebook group, I'm still gonna kind of join in. As I said, I felt like I had the perfect palettes to go along with the themes from this year. So for my Pan Those Palettes 2024, I'm going to be working on a fun-sized palette, which is the Wet n Wild Color Icon in my Glamour Squad, which is a drugstore dupe of the Anastasia Beverly Hills Soft Glam palette. And for my Better Together palette, I'm going to be working on my Smashbox Cover Shot Major Metals eye palette. So I'm going to talk through these palettes, my decision to include them this year for these themes, and also talk about my goals for both of the palettes. So this Smashbox palette is technically the oldest palette in my collection, and the Wet n Wild palette is my second oldest, followed by my Morphe and Jaclyn Hill palette, which is my third oldest. As I mentioned, I have a large eyeshadow palette collection, and the ones that are getting older in my collection, they need some use. So I figure I really enjoy the mattes in the Wet n Wild palette, and these are perfect neutral everyday colors for me. The shimmers in this palette do leave a little bit to be desired though. So my idea was that for Better Together, I could dip into the Smashbox Cover Shot palette, which is all shimmers, and the color stories of these palettes actually coordinate quite well. I'll just try and give you a little close-up there. So for any look coming out of the Wet n Wild palette, whether it's a more neutral kind of a look, golds, bronzes, or even those plummy purples and pinkish reds, I pretty much have corresponding shimmers in the Smashbox palette. So my thinking was that I could build the basis of the look with this palette and really try and hit pan in every shade in this Wet n Wild palette, and then dip into the shimmers in the Smashbox palette as topper shades, or to kind of just amp up the looks from the Wet n Wild palette, and not have the goal to hit pan in every shade in this palette, but just to get more use out of it since it is the oldest palette in my collection. So I already have one pan in the Wet n Wild palette in this kind of neutral brown shade. My goal is to hit pan in all of the other shades in this palette and just see how far I can get. And I don't really have any timeline for this. I mean, I'm obviously going to be dipping into it throughout the year, but I'm not going to be forcing myself or rushing myself to hit pans. I just kind of want to see what happens organically with use, having this as kind of like my everyday palette that sits on my vanity. And for the Smashbox palette, if I hit pan, that'll be a nice bonus surprise, but my goal is not necessarily to hit pan in this palette, but just to make sure that I'm using it and giving it some love before it kind of gets too old and I have to reevaluate whether or not it's still good, the formula is still the same. As of right now, the formula in this one seems to still be really good, and I have no concerns about it, you know, going bad throughout the course of this year, but obviously we'll be reevaluating that with usage. I will go ahead and insert some swatches of both of these palettes and how the color stories look together. So hopefully you can get a sense of the fact that they really do kind of pair quite well and will be the perfect match for the Better Together prompt. And they are both pretty small, which is a nice change from my Morphe and Jaclyn Hill palette. So they are both technically fun-sized, but I did immediately think of my Wet n Wild color icon for the fun-size prompt. So those are my plans for Pan That Palette 2024. Just as a general mindset for the year of 2024, I am going to take my time. I'm not going to be in a hurry. I'm going to try and be very mindful to not put any pressure on this project, on any project that I end up working on this year, or really on any part of my makeup usage, because at the end of the day, it's just makeup and it really doesn't matter how much progress I make in the grand scheme of things. I just want to use and love the makeup that I have. I'm getting married this year. I know that will affect my makeup usage, and who knows what 2024 will bring. Hopefully only good things, but a year is a long time to commit to working on anything. So I'm just trying to bear that in mind and not stress myself out over it. And I would recommend for any of you who are also planning to pan something this year that you do the same, because it's all just supposed to be fun, right? If you are working on a Pan That Palette this year, if you're part of the Pantastic Ladies collab, or maybe you're working on other panning projects this year, please let me know in the comments down below. I would love to follow your progress. I get super motivated by seeing other people's progress. So yeah, leave a comment letting us know what you're working on and where we can go to cheer you on and encourage you in your projects as well. And if you'd like to follow along with my panning this year, I'm going to, again, take some of the pressure off and not feel like I have to update you every single month, even if there's no progress. I'm going to take a little bit more of a fluid approach to my updates this year and not make promises that I'm going to be updating you on X date every single month. It will be at least quarterly, if not maybe kind of every other month. Just so I can keep myself on track and celebrate my own progress. But yeah, if you're interested in seeing those updates when they come around, feel free to subscribe to my channel. Just briefly before we go, again, I also just want to say thank you to all of you who are already subscribed. I have now officially had my YouTube channel for around a year, if not exactly a year. And the last year of making YouTube videos has been so much fun. It's been such a safe space and such a comforting, positive environment. And it's really given me a fun, creative outlet to turn to and kind of an escape from a lot of the difficult things that happened in 2023. And I am really excited to continue making content in the year ahead. So my next video should be up in the next couple of days. I've got a couple more project finales from 2023 that I need to wrap up and a couple more projects for 2024 that I need to introduce. But other than that, I hope to see you in my next video. Give the video a like if you liked it, and I will see you in my next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.